Well, welcome people to a important meeting. I think some of you can guess what happened. Zoom booted me out of my own platform. I have no idea why. It said the technical error was there was nothing wrong with my internet connection. I was, I had my Wi-Fi. I've been using it, as you know, from my own bedroom for weeks. So I don't know what it was. Something, maybe it was Putin. Who knows? Anyway, so I hope we'll have a few more people joining us. I resent, you notice, I had to start a new meeting, go all the way out of this old one. That's what the delay was. But thank you for your persistence, those who are with us. Hopefully some of the others will join us soon. But as long as we have a little bit, I'm going to give it like 3 or 4 more minutes before we start the slides. I think it's appropriate in this time of international, crisis to take 2 minutes tops, maybe three, to make a personal note on what's happening between Ukraine and Russia. My daughter, I think I've told all my classes this semester, was adopted from Russia, and both of us know people in Ukraine. And this is really personal for her. She's been up late at night watching the live news feed. And of course, many of you may have. And if you haven't, it's pretty grim, except for the fact.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't know if it's my computer, but I can't hear you or anything.
Uh-oh, that's bad. That could be.
I can hear you.
Oh, well, that's helpful to know because I know sometimes I accidentally hit something on the side where, let's see, this might just make a difference. I don't want to do the wrong thing, but it's supposed to increase the volume. Well, I'm at 100% on my own laptop, and I joined with computer audio. So can you hear me now? So Adair, you can hear me, but the person who just mentioned it is, I'm sorry, who was that? Couldn't tell.
I think that was Haley.
Haley, can you hear me now? Shoot, that's because I had to resend a new ID number. I had to send it, not resend it, and I hope you saw that's what that was. But I also don't know if that might affect the. I hate losing people at this point. But can everybody else hear me? Yeah, here we go. Let's try again. Maybe this will work. Hi, Haley. Were you able? Because some of the other students said they can't hear me, and I know I did join with computer audio the same way I always have, and my audio isn't off. Can you hear me now? Ask to unmute. Okay. Well, I don't mute my students, so I don't think. Can you hear me now, Haley? Because of course this is being recorded. Darn, that's frustrating. Yeah, we've got technical glitches, and who knows if they could have something to do with. Can the other people hear? Let's try one more time.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
I can hear you as well.
Good. That's helpful because there's only one other person I'd think, what is going on? Anyway, I don't want to take too much of our time because we do have some important slides, Etruscan and Roman art, but we do have 2 lectures, this one and Wednesday, to go through all those slides. I think it's important to mention a couple quick observations because I doubt you'll have any other instructor, well, maybe some of you will, who's ever even been to Ukraine. I know that country quite well. And the city of Kiev, I've spent 2 visits there with a Ukrainian family. They befriended me on a train ride from Kiev. And yes, that's how the Ukrainians pronounce it when they speak English, not Kiev, but that is the way the media is saying it. Anyway, from Kiev to Moscow, that's a long overnight train ride in 1990 before the fall of the Soviet Union. I'll never forget the experience. We were up all night talking and comparing literature, writers, art, history, culture, music. I mentioned I was a professor already of art history, and one of I think the father of the family was a professor of science. Anyway, it was a wonderful experience. And then they invited me to come back when it was opening up again in 91 and the Soviet Union was about to collapse, but it was still around. I was with that family when they voted in the Ukraine in 1991, 92% to form their own country, and they were allowed to leave peacefully by Gorbachev. Totally different kind of ruler from this bastard, pardon my French, this man is awful. He's killed so many people. Well, we don't even know how many, with poison and, you know, plutonium in their tea and all that. But now we see it being done on a mass scale. It's really upsetting for my daughter and somewhat for me. Now, the family I mentioned, they're safely in Paris, but they still have family there. They still have aunts and uncles and cousins. But I got to say, my last point on this is, I think most people would agree, the rest of the world outside of what's left of the Russian media, the world's hero now is Zelensky. A really brave person to be able to stay in that, unlike so many other leaders when their countries are attacked that turn around and leave. And in some ways it's understandable because he's probably at the top of Putin's hit list. So I don't know about how the rest of you feel, but if you have any, there's all kinds of things online, legitimate, to help with medical supplies, food, you know, and aid that isn't even about war. It's just about people who are trying to survive. So I hope some of you would join us. Okay, Elijah, welcome. Welcome, Elijah. You just missed my little spiel about having friends in Ukraine or from Ukraine. Anyway, let's move on to the topic. This is the main topic, of course, today. And at this point, I think what I have to do is I probably have to pull it up again because I was booted. No, it's still there. Hey, I was booted out, in case you're just joining us, by unceremoniously by a glitch in Zoom. It had nothing to do with me or any aspect of my technology, because I've been connected to the internet this whole afternoon. Okay, so let's now get this slide, the first slide from the syllabus, as large as we can. And let's talk about who were the Etruscans. But first, the title of this first must-know slide, okay, for this week. It's one word, sarcophagus, or as my Indiana relatives would say, sarcophagus, Sarcophagus, sarcophagus. And the location is, it's a town in Italy, actually been there, Cerveteri, Cerveteri, Cerveteri. And the date is 520 BC or BCE. So this is a piece of funerary art, and it was found in one of the tombs that are buried underground in various ancient Etruscan burial sites. They're called necropolis. Now, if you have you should always have right next to your laptop, along with the syllabus, the list of terms to know. So we're going to look at, this is an example of, well, let's talk about what a sarcophagus is first. That's the first definition. We have three definitions for this week's lecture topic on Etruscan art. And then we'll do some of the Roman ones. Actually, we'll get to those on Wednesday, probably. All right, so what's a sarcophagus? Oh, okay, it's a large box made of stone or metal, comma, a large box made of stone or metal, comma, containing the remains of a deceased human being, containing the remains of a deceased human being, and often with decorations on the outside. That's what we're looking at. And once again, and often with decorations on the outside. Most sarcophagi, or a sarcophagus, usually they're decorated either with carving or actual figures of what? The bodies of the people, as you might have guessed, who were, you know, interred. They're not buried. But then this was a sarcophagus along with dozens of other sarcophagus in the same tomb. There are hundreds of Etruscan, probably thousands by now, that have been excavated. And those tombs were underground in a necropolis. So what is a necropolis? Now that definition is very short. It's a city of the dead. That is actually the Greek word necropolis translates literally. So I'll say it again. Necropolis is a city of the dead with fancy tombs arranged along a street-like pattern. With fancy tombs arranged along a street-like pattern. Can anybody think of any, let me just ask this, does anybody know whether or not there are any necropolises anywhere today in the modern in the world. There are places you can go see them. I'll give you a clue. Paris, I think London has at least a couple. New Orleans has a whole bunch, and Oakland and San Francisco doesn't have any more, but they used to. San Francisco moved theirs to the peninsula, but there is one in Oakland. It's the largest necropolis in, I think, all of, well, Northern California. And then there's Forest Lawn, where some of the movie stars of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, were interred. So yes, there are necropolises today, in other words. So, but the Etruscans are the first major culture, at least again in the Western world, to make that a regular practice, you could say, or ritual of funerary art. They would, of course, we're talking about their upper classes. I mean, it should be obvious that these aren't the poorest people, the workers, the peasants. But among the upper classes or ruling classes, they would often put their centuries, actually, not just generations, centuries of the same families, sarcophagi, that's the plural, right, of sarcophagus, inside these fancy tombs. And then the tombs were underground, but they still were arranged along a street-like pattern with the name of that family tomb right outside the entrance. You'd have to go into a tunnel. I've been in several of them. They're both creepy and fascinating. Outside of Rome, there's a big one, and that's where I believe this originally was, this sarcophagus. Now, if you care to know, you don't have to write this, but it's in the Louvre, on display in the Louvre in Paris. So obviously it was taken out of Italy, probably by Napoleon soldiers. These are life-size figures, the other part of the meaning, of a upper-class couple. They were married. I think it should be obvious they're, very intimate couple. And in life, they seem, based on their, let's take a slightly closer look here, based on their expressions and their body language, to have had a very happy or, close relationship. But it's interesting, the gestures. One of my students said many years ago in one of my lectures once that this looks like he's saying, "Where's the remote?" behind the sofa. It's an unusual combination of gestures that look like there must be something happening. Well, yes, it's the other part of the meaning, is that this kind of burial ritual, that is, putting their upper class family members, couples, obviously they didn't die at well, they could have died at the same time, but the odds are one follows the other years later. Eventually, both of them in the same sarcophagus. And then each family for generations has these upper class families, new sarcophagi added when other members of their family later on pass away. But where they are is not just in a big empty room, they are in a site called the Cult of the Dead, or a place, which is an example, I should say it that way, an example of their religious belief. And that's our last new definition for today. What does that mean, cult of the dead? Well, it's a term that describes the religious belief. So here we go. Here's that definition of the Etruscans. The cult of the dead was a religious belief of the ancient Etruscans in which they thought their deceased ancestors would come to life every night inside their tombs and party until dawn for eternity. That's a pretty, but there's no other culture that had that belief, I don't think, on the planet. I'll say it again. I mean, it's a unique concept of what the afterlife is like. So again, the cult of the dead was an ancient, well, you have to say ancient, the Etruscans were ancient, so you just say an Etruscan, that's capital Etruscan. You should know that word because it's, of course, not only about the meaning of this, but it's in the textbook in Stockstead. So I'll say it again. The cult of the dead was a religious belief of the Etruscans in which they thought their deceased ancestors would come to life inside their tombs every night and party until dawn. There's no other word for it. I mean, you could say celebrate if you prefer, until dawn throughout eternity. I mean, forever. That would just, every night that would happen. So that means that these people would not go near their ancestors' tombs after dark or until, after the sunrise. If they didn't want to see Uncle Mort doing the two-step or whatever. They really believed that, or did they? Well, that's what they told their own young members, their children and younger members of their culture. Whether they believed or not, the evidence is they did. Why? Because there have been records found. Etruscan language is a mystery. No one knows that, but we found evidence. I shouldn't say records. Evidence at the entrances to some of these tombs where vessels of food, meaning anything from wine jugs to vases with totally petrified dried goods, were placed near the entrance of these tombs, and we have some of their visual evidence to show why did they do that, because they believed they were feeding their deceased ancestors, who would then come take, of course, supposedly some of these food and wine or liquid libations, whatever you want to call them, drinks, into the tomb and imbibe them at night. Well, of course, who really took those? Well, probably the caretakers who maintained those cemeteries, those necropolises, actually took that stuff home with them. But in any case, that's the Etruscans kept doing that for hundreds of years. The last thing about the Etruscans we'll say before we do a formal analysis is that they were the dominant culture in Italy before the Romans. They ruled almost all of Italy for centuries before the rise of Rome, and the Romans destroyed them, literally destroyed their culture. They fought with each other. The Romans won that. That should be obvious from just basic information about what happened. Rome rose to become more powerful than the Etruscans. The Etruscans once ruled the Romans when they were a small town, but the Romans grew much more powerful and overthrew the Etruscans and then wiped out every one of their cities. Okay, but not their tombs. We can still see them. So this is a warm earth tone. Really good similar texture on. Look how they wore their dreads on their hairdos, and their faces, of course, and hands, feet, even clothing. It's all realistic similar texture, all of course done with carved line. I would consider this almost entirely stable. They're both sitting upright, pretty much straight upright. From their waist to their top of their heads, and then their legs are stretched out, and of course the bed is mostly stable, but obviously there's a bit of dynamic detail on the edge here, where I guess this is the top of the bed here, or maybe it's a pillow below there, the tops of their heads, yes, but mostly it's pretty stable. The largest mass is the bed. That's pretty easy. Then the husband, then the wife. The technique for space, well, it's a life-size image of two adults, and they overlap, of course, the bed they're on, and their clothing overlaps their bodies. There's no modeling. This is on display in a exhibit in a museum now in Paris, right? So there's no technique for modeling. At night, these tombs were pitch dark, except if these people came back to life and came out of their sarcophagi, they must have had some kind of lighting, but obviously no technique was used to create modeling here. That's just the lighting from the museums. Let's see, I think, balanced. Well, it's weighted to, of course, toward the right. This, by the way, if you're curious, you'll have to write this. When the French, I mean, what other word is it, but stole this and took it to Paris from Italy, where they found it, they cut it open to see what was left, and it was probably just skeletons, of course, of this couple. And then it was reassembled when it made it to the museum in Paris. If you're curious, that's not the original thing. They would have lifted up the figures of the two to put the bodies, the first one, then the other inside. You don't have to write that kind of detail, but if you're just curious, how did that work? They had an opening at the top to put in the interred remains of these two people. Okay, I think I've covered everything. Modeling, line, texture. Oh, rhythm. Yeah, of course, there's lots of rhythm with the arms, hands, heads, and even their feet. Okay, let's now go on to the next. This is, I believe, sometimes I cut things down. No, this is still on the syllabus. The Tomb of the Lionesses. Tomb of the Lionesses. That's, of course, the word tomb is T-O-M-B. Lionesses, plural, of course, female lions, is L-I-O-N-E-S-S-E-S. Okay, Tomb of the Lionesses. And this is in Tarquinia. That's the actual city I got to see. It's again a necropolis outside of Rome, about 20 miles away from Rome. I'll spell that Tarqunia, Tarquinia, 470 BC or BCE. Okay, so this is an example of these tombs that were left undisturbed for thousands of years. I mean, the Etruscans were, uh, a very powerful culture for, I think it was like for about 400 years, from around 700 to about 300, and then the Romans started to overtake them. And within 100 years or so, or a little more than that, they had wiped out the Etruscans within about, well, several decades. It wasn't overnight, but their golden age, when they were the rulers of almost all of Italy, including the early city of Rome, was around about 400 years, from around 700 to about 300 BC. So that's the same period as the Golden Age, or overlaps with the period of the Golden Age of Greece. So they traded with the Greeks, we know that. But this tomb would have been typical of their wall paintings. Let's get a closer look here. Frescoes, of course, in which male and female dancers, musicians, you see here a musician playing a flute, servers, people who cooked and served. This is what they believed. Their servants would be buried with them too, not killed, you know what I mean, before they were ready, their time was up. But once they died, these wealthy families would have the servants of their deceased ancestors buried in the same tombs, and they would then supposedly come to life along with the family members. And of course, unfortunately, in the next life, they had the same serving role as servants for the upper classes. But at least they got food and wine, and that was their afterlife. So that's what you're seeing here, is entertaining going on, and according to that belief of the cult of the dead that we just defined. These are dancers. I assume they're female, but on the other hand, it's not obvious, right? I mean, it's hard to say. This could be a man here wearing an unusual attire that looks like a dress, but perhaps just adopting. Of course, this looks like he's got wings for his arms. We don't have any written records because their language has never been interpreted, and I'm not sure why. It's one of the mysteries of history. There's so many, but this one's a big one. I mean, we found these tombs hundreds of years ago. These tombs were found maybe around the 1700s. They started to be explored when there was an interest in reviving, or restoring, like Pompeii was being restored then, or begun to be discovered. Pompeii was rediscovered in the late mid 1700s, so over 250 years ago. So since all that time, these cities, these Etruscan cities, more of them have been found every couple of decades or so. There are dozens of them all over Italy. Now, this might or might not be one of the lionesses, but I can tell you that the lionesses are on one of the walls of this tomb. I've been inside this tomb. All the sarcophagi were taken out, so that's part of the meaning here, and put into a museum, which is in that same town, Tarquinia. And boy, is that museum X-rated. You can write this however you want. I'm not going to give you TMI here about why I say that, but I'll give you a clue. They were not hung up about human sexuality, any type, form, or whatever variation, we'll say, of consensual human sexual interaction they depicted in their art. And so that museum has a warning that children, I think they define adults as over 18 in Italy. I think that's right. In some states in the US, it's 21, right? But anyway, whatever the legal definition of an adult is in Italy, they must, if you're under that age, you must be accompanied by an adult. In multiple languages, as you get to the museum front desk, you end up finding out, oh yeah, I see why they say that if you walk, into the museum, because their artwork is pretty out there. That's pretty open and X-rated is the phrase I'll use. They just weren't hung up about human sexuality and depicting it in their art. So this is one part of the tomb which doesn't have that, or I wouldn't be showing it to you because that would be a problem for many reasons. But here you do see some indication of what the cult of the dead was all about. So if it's on the exam, you would just be able to say that let's do the formal analysis now. Again, the Tomb of the Lionesses, it had female lions on at least a couple of the walls, and various entertainment, just entertainment activities such as singing, dancing, playing musical instruments, which were performed by the servants who were buried along with the rulers, the ruling class, I should say, families, in the same tombs. And they all supposedly woke up at night, every night for eternity, and partied. But of course, one group, the servants, catered to the wealthier people, but perhaps they got to join some of the celebration with the food and wine, at least. It's fascinating. These are life-size figures, by the way. When I was here, I'm just about 6 feet. My head came up to around the knees of this group of people. So these are frescoes, and these tombs are now preserved, and you can't just walk into them. You have to. They're what's the word? Protected by the Italian government. There we go, with careful access control. You have to buy a ticket, and you're not allowed to take flash photos and certain other kinds of equipment. You can't bring in tripods, stuff like that. It's a very limited amount. I think cell phones would be allowed. It's fascinating. There are dozens of them, and just in this one city where this tomb was found. Again, it's on Yourself Tarquinium in Italy. Okay, let's do a formal analysis. Well, it's hard to say because this is an odd angle, isn't it? But the tomb would be symmetrical, definitely. I can tell you from having walked into it. And the rhythm is obvious with these human figures, at least these two, and these two have some similarities. And obviously each body has rhythm of the arms, hands, legs, feet, of course, heads. They're really well done in terms of symmetric texture on their hair, their costumes. Really, these are costumes, clearly. And then I guess these are just clothing, robes, somewhat like a toga. And so, of course, that symmetric texture is done with painted, not carved, painted line. I would say the colors are warm on the human figures, including mostly on their attire. I mean, to me, this is it's kind of an off pink color and then dark brown. Of course, the hair is a neutral color. Most of them have black hair. And there would have been cool colors. You can see them on the ceiling here, some of the alternating patterns on the ceiling are between, warm and cool, blue, pink, and dark, almost red colors. And the lines are all thin outline here is used. There is modeling here, but it's limited. It's really only on a little bit on the faces, but not really much, actually. Now, looking closely, I've seen more modeling on some of the other tombs. So here there's minimal modeling. It's just the skin tones vary a little bit. And then we have, is it stable? Well, the walls of the tomb itself were stable, but the ceiling is, of course, dynamic. And the human figures are almost all in motion with their arms outstretched, their legs in motion, so that they're mostly dynamic. The largest mass, well, the tomb itself, you'd have to say it would be a close call. If you think of the ceiling as a single mass, because it obviously goes all the way over off the edge of the right end of the photo, then it would be the ceiling, and then the side walls. Of course, it was a long, narrow tomb. Some of the tombs are big square shaped tombs. There are different shapes in these Etruscan tombs, but this one is long and narrow. So the second largest mass would be the side walls, and then the walls at either end. And there are frescoes on all four walls, all the way around. Okay, I think that's covered. Oh, dynamic, yeah, I think I covered that. Yeah. Oh, for space, sorry. Yes, we got to always do that. There's just overlapping. I don't see anything else with the clothing overlapping their bodies. And then over here, you've got, let's get a little closer to this, some of the food being prepared, apparently. At least that's what it looks like here. For, the partying. And so there's obviously some overlapping of the objects on those tables with each other. Okay. Now, this is a different tomb. You see, this one's square, and this one was, even to me, is more interesting because, see, each of these, maybe you have to write this, not a must know now. This is just for your information. But it's each one of these rectangular beds. I mean, that's the only word for these, right? Or slots, if you want to call them. Each one held a different sarcophagus with the carved figures of the deceased ancestors on top of them, just like that first one. And I think one or two people joined us a little late, so you can go back and see. I'll have it posted. I'm trying to do them more like Thursday, but no later than Friday evening by 7 or 8. You'll see, each of my lectures on YouTube. Anyway, so for this one, again, you'll have to take notes, but this would have been one of the larger ones because first you had all of these. You can see there are dozens and dozens of these slots. And this is only about not even half of the length of this particular tomb. And then you had sarcophagi, again, usually having at least two ancestors in each of their sarcophaguses, sarcophagi, in each of these niches. And then you've got these beautiful decorations. See, they use these things in there. They believe, the Etruscans, that these tools and wine, see wine jug there. And I'm not sure if that's a whip. Anyway, all kinds of interesting objects that somehow came into use by these, dead ancestors after they came to life at night, every night for eternity. And then some
Those little spaces remind me of like the World War II, or World War I, like bunkers, or they'd sleep on like the side of the walls.
Oh, I see what you mean. That's interesting. Yeah, no, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. No, it's both fascinating and creepy when you walk through these places. First of all, they're underneath a very more. I mean, Italy is a very green. It rains so much there, and so there's a little bit of a musty smell, and it's not from anything except the earth around it, and of course, somewhat you can see the discoloration on these columns, right, over the centuries, millennia. This is almost 3,000 years old. This one, I think, was from 700 BC, near the beginning of the Etruscans' urban culture. Anyway, it's fascinating. There's no other culture was quite like them in the ancient world. Okay, this is the next must know. Okay. Porta Augusta. Porta, Porta, 2 words, Augusta, Augusta. Porta Augusta, Perugia, and that's Perugia. Perugia. It's a city in Italy. And the date was 200 BC or BCE. Now, this slide is better than the ones I have used in the past because it's color, so you can get some sense of not only the color, obviously, of the material, but even better image of the texture. Plus, it's not 70 or more years old. The old black and white slide that I sometimes have used is not as good as this. So this one, I'm not saying it's so important. I should stop and go back to that very first slide. But since a couple people just joined us in the last several minutes, I'm going to say this slide, I'm not cutting from the study list. It has a high possibility, if not a probability, of being on the midterm. Speaking of which, I was going to make that announcement before I was so rudely booted out of my own Zoom platform for no good reason. And some of you, of course, noticed that, and I appreciate your persistence. I was going to mention, making sure you know that the midterm is March 16th. So that is 2 weeks from Wednesday, and we are going to review for it for at least one whole class session. But it's not so much as a review, although we'll do some of that, as explaining how the test is given. That's getting ahead of ourselves, so I'm not going to go into that now. But it's a 1 hour exam, but you will have more time than that. Oh, yes, there is another announcement. I received 10 papers out of the 14 registered students in this class at this moment, at least the last time I checked. And so I got one more. Thank you. I think it was Elijah. And that one, only because it was only a few days late, any paper turned in before 1 week, here's the point. If you're one of those remaining, I think that would leave it 3 more students, or anybody who's not, in other words, turned your paper in. If you can get them in by midnight tonight, it's only 5 points off. So if you're hearing me now, well, I guess some of people just gave up and wandered away. But the best I can do is say, you got, a little bit of a leeway to try and get the paper in to have only 5 points off if I get it by midnight. After that, it's 10 points and it doesn't go up. 10 points off for being late. That's been my late policy since I first started teaching. And I announced it as in the handout I gave everybody on grading policy. But just in case that isn't obvious, Today technically is 1 week after the due date, but I figure that might give a couple of you some opportunity to turn your papers in before the point deduction goes up. So if I see any more papers from anyone who didn't turn them in already by midnight, those will only have 5 points up. Okay. All right, let's get to this slide. Anyway, I'm not saying it's so important it won't be cut, but right now, like is with all of the slides that I show you from the syllabus, assume it has a possibility of being on the midterm. Okay, so I already spelled the name of it and the city in Italy. Why are we looking at some broken down old gate from some part of Italy that most people never go to, most tourists anyway? Because it's the last surviving Etruscan city walls, or a section, a remaining section of the last surviving Etruscan city walls. This city was the last Etruscan city, another way to say that, to fall to the Romans. It held out, sounds familiar, right? Against superior numbers. By the time this city fell to the Romans, which was, I think, around 100, it had held out for years against superior Roman military forces. And the Romans grudgingly, you could say it this way, or, somehow seemed, you could word it that way if you prefer, to have some respect for the fact that those Etruscan soldiers had defended their cities so, steadfastly, all right, so fiercely. And so they didn't destroy the city walls, but they did either enslave, I'm not sure which, or both, kill or enslave all the men of fighting age inside the city once they took it. And they, I think the others, the women and children, were either exiled or sold into slavery. That's pretty much how almost all the ancient cultures behaved, but the Romans always did. They rarely just gave mercy, but sometimes that happened occasionally with the Roman military victory. But usually your fate was, if you weren't of fighting age, you became a slave somewhere else in the empire, put on a ship and sent to another province. Or if you were of military age, you would be executed usually, or sold into slavery if you were lucky. So the Romans we're talking about now took this city, but they left the city walls and they adopted them to their own purpose to defend this had become a Roman city. So again, that, indicates one aspect of the Etruscan culture, that they were really fierce warriors, and they, despite the fact that the Romans were more powerful by the time this city was under siege, like what we're seeing, 3-to-1 ratio, by the way. So I just did the math earlier today. So my daughter was asked about what is the ratio of armed forces between the Ukrainians and the Russians. The Russians have a 3-to-1 advantage, and a 5-to-1 advantage in tanks, and a 10-to-1 advantage in air power. So it's David and Goliath, literally, that analogy, right, from ancient folklore or the Bible. It is a battle between, almost like a David and Goliath effect. Anyway, this battle was similar in that sense. And so the Romans decided, all right, let's adopt these walls because they work so well keeping us out for our own use. However, if it's not obvious, this has nothing to do with an ancient. Those are Renaissance rooms added to the top of one of the two towers, because originally the Etruscan walls and the Romans, when they kept them, there was just there's only missing one little corner here. So these were intact for thousands of years. These walls were intact, and they still are, basically. So this part's part of the meaning now, where you see the arches there and the windows. Of course, they didn't usually have window glass in a fortified gateway to a military city entrance. So that's later. That was done in the Renaissance. Not sure which century, probably the 1500s. It was added many, many, many hundreds of years, 1500 years later, by Italian Renaissance architects or architect. So that's not original. So just imagine this, and we'll just do the formal analysis on the part that is original. Obviously, there was a big, heavy gate. It probably was wood. It could have been metal, and that's long gone. It's just now an opening into one of these narrow city streets. In fact, let's take a look down there. I haven't been to this part of Italy, but it still functions in a way, but really it's just a historical site now. It's protected, I'm sure, by the government of Italy, probably, if not the UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's probably a World Heritage Site. I would think it would be, but I don't know that for sure. So if you don't want to write that, you don't have to. But it is a National Historic Site in Italy. I know that. All right, that's pretty much the whole meaning. Oh, well, there is one other fact. It's not a minor one. I should actually not forget. Arches, rounded arches. You could say semicircular if you prefer, or rounded arches. There are two of them on this gate. They're original. The brick is filled in later, same time as those rooms added at the top of the tower on the left. So it was really an open arch above and obviously an open gateway below. Etruscans, many historians believe, invented the round arch. For centuries, it was assumed that the Romans had, because they used them, and you'll see that in the slides. We'll get to maybe one or two Roman slides today, but a lot more on Wednesday, of Roman architecture. But the Romans did not invent the rounded arch. It was around for centuries before the Romans used it. So just say many historians believe that the Etruscans invented the round. You can't say round like that'd be circular, rounded or semicircular, either phrase will do, archway. And that's basically a very important part of the development of any kind of entry or gateway and walls and other, just say for architectural systems which have stonework. You know, that's the most, it's the strongest. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. The strongest or most secure method of reinforcing, you know, either an opening, a gateway, or the walls of the city, or any other kind of architectural feature is to use, if it's a stone structure, the rounded arch is the strongest way to support it. It's stronger than a lintel would be, or any other kind of opening of a different shape. So the Etruscans are credited by many historians with inventing the rounded arch. All right, formal analysis. Cool gray color, of course. Remember, this is not original. So everything above that, all that brickwork's later. It's not part of what you, if it's on the midterm, you don't have to write about that. The texture, probably obvious, is a real rough texture of stone. There is the rhythm of each individual block of stone, but really the two towers themselves have rhythm because they both taper, right, to a narrower ledge. And then this creates rhythm. These are the only decorative features here. These short little, you know, tops of a column or parts of a column with us. Well, these are probably supposed to be shields. It's hard to know, but anyway, these just say geometric pattern above the main opening or main gateway is rhythm. And then the two arches each are similar, of course. So there's plenty of rhythm. It's dynamic on the arches. And I guess you could say on the circular pattern above the arches or between the arches. Pretty much everything else is stable. Although technically, since there's a slight tapering here, you could consider that a diagonal line on the corners of the two towers. So you could say they're slightly dynamic. But really, individually, the towers, the gate, the blocks of stone make this structure mostly stable. There is carved line. It's visual at the corners, as is true with all architecture. Remember, where the sun, the modeling or shadows, natural modelings from the sun's shadows, and that creates visual line. But there is carved line, again, on these geometric patterns just above the main gateway. And then we have, let's see, balance. It would have been, if you can't see the whole thing. If the photo was taken a little further over here, you'd see these two towers are the same height and roughly the same width. There's a slight difference maybe in the angle of the two corners, but that's a minor thing. So basically it's symmetrical left to right and top to bottom. You could say it's not balanced, it's unbalanced toward the top but once this arch was open here, I would say originally that was an open archway. We'd have had a soldier, an archer, maybe stand in the archway or maybe two or three to guard the entrance. So I would say it's even balanced in that sense, but there is a lot more open space below the midline. So you could say that it's unbalanced toward the top in this case. But then you can get into really technical things that we don't need to do. But the bottom of these two towers is wider than the top. So you could say it's unbalanced toward the bottom on the towers, unbalanced toward the top on the gateway. Okay, what are we missing here? Oh, mass. Well, the largest masses are the two towers. They're pretty much equal. And then the bottom part, or if you want to say the whole entryway, but if you broke it down into two halves, if you chose to divide it, you could say the bottom part with the main opening or archway would be the second largest, and then the upper archway would be the third largest. And for space, it's all real space. These two towers are about 50 feet high. Well, no, they're not quite that tall. They're about 45 feet high. And then the main opening, the main gateway, sorry, above this right here at the top of this was about 50 feet. So you have real space where you have two towers, roughly 45 feet or so each, and then a central gateway that is about 50 feet tall. Okay, any questions? I know we just, all right, now this is one I'm not cutting from the study list. And it's she-wolf, 2 words, she-wolf, from Rome location, and the date is 500 BC or BCE. Okay, well, this is an Etruscan bronze sculpture of a mother wolf, right? A female wolf, but she's suckling 2 human babies. So some of you may already know the story, but if you don't, you should write this, of the founding of Rome. This is an illustration, this Etruscan sculpture, and yet why is it in Rome? Was it in Rome when it was founded? It still is. It's in a different part of the city. It's in the Vatican now, a museum owned by the Pope, right? But originally it was in probably they think the town hall, the main, temple. It would have been a temple, of course, style building, a Greek style temple. The Roman just copied that style architecture somewhere in Rome when it was first cast. How did that happen? Well, it was a gift. Most historians, just again, we don't know for sure because there's no written, text that went with it when it was found. The 2 babies, most historians think were added later in the Renaissance. So this was found hundreds of years ago, buried in a place that they believe would have been originally, before it fell into ruin, the town hall or city hall, you could say even, of early Rome, when Rome was under Etruscan rule. That's the main point that makes sense. If you don't know this story, you should be writing it. That the Etruscans, as I said just a little earlier in this lecture, they were the most powerful culture for hundreds of years in Italy. They ruled the whole peninsula, and it is, of course, a peninsula. They ruled almost all of Italy, and including the early Roman people in the small city of what was then just one of their vassal. That's a word you can use, or you can say subject cities where they ruled over other people. The Romans had a different language, of course, and much different culture, different religion, but they were ruled by the Etruscans. So when the Etruscans created this sculpture, many historians believe it originally did have 2 human babies. And if that is the case, which we don't know for sure, but there's at least many people believe that's what it would have looked like as you see it in this slide, when it was presented as a gift to the Romans as a way of placating. That's the word I would use. Or you can say, ingratiating themselves to the Romans. Why? Because the Romans kept rebelling. They were a rebellious people. They kept trying to break away from the Etruscans, their rulers, the Etruscans. They kept every, generation or so, there'd be a different uprising by the Romans against the Etruscans. And for centuries, the Etruscans could just, put down those rebellions. So at some point they decided to give, hang on. Problem after problem. I've got my battery connecting here, so it just temporarily fell out. There we go. That should be all right. There we are. Sorry about that small interruption. Okay. Back to what this story is. Here's how to summarize it if you don't already know. It's Romulus and Remus. I think at least some of you know that story. The 2 founders, they were brothers of Rome. Romulus, I'll spell it for you since many of you haven't probably written or seen their names. Romulus, Romulus, and Remus, Remus. M-U-S. Romulus and Remus, according to the Roman foundation myth. There's really no other phrase for that. Every culture has a foundation myth. And there's a big debate over, our own foundation myths, plural. Most cultures have multiple myths, but the Romans had pretty much one basic story they told themselves about how Rome was founded. And here it is. Two human babies named Romulus and Remus were abandoned by their parents in the forests where Rome is now, before Rome even existed. And they were adopted by a she-wolf, and that's why this is called she-wolf, and raised as though they were her own. And as one of my good friends said once when he heard that story, that explains everything, which I would write it this way. Don't write that phrase, but that the Romans are known, pretty much everyone knows, if you know anything about ancient Romans and their empire, but even before they became an empire, when they were just a city under Etruscan rule, the Romans are known for various characteristics, including aggressiveness, violence, and territoriality. Well, that is all part of what this would have symbolized if these two babies actually were raised by a she-wolf and grew up to found the city of Rome, Romulus and Remus, that's their myth, their foundation myth. Then it might explain the behavior of the Roman people, right? It's starting with just the city of Rome and then expanding into a huge empire that was the biggest the world had, the Western, I have to say, Western world had ever seen. We'll get to that, of course, in the next lecture on Wednesday, how big the Roman Empire was and how much it influenced the world, the Western world again. So once again, I hope it's easy to summarize it. The story this tells or symbolizes is that these two babies, Romulus and Remus, were abandoned in the woods, and a she-wolf adopted them, raised them as her own, and they grew up to be violent, aggressive, and territorial, and found the city of Rome. And so that's their foundation myth. Okay, so this was probably some kind of a gesture of, right, like I said, to kind of placate the Romans, to hopefully keep them from rebelling. Well, it didn't work, because not long after this sculpture was created, it's been carbon dated, so we kind of know it's right about 500 BC. Not long after that, Rome finally succeeded in kicking the Etruscans out. And the rest, as they say, is history. The Romans kept expanding beyond their own town walls, and then their province, and then beyond that section of Italy, and eventually all of Italy, and wiped out the Etruscans. So it's kind of like the last, you might say, gesture of the Etruscans to try and placate the Romans, but it didn't work. Okay, formal analysis. It's a cool color, isn't it? Kind of a bluish color in this photo, at least. I've seen it, but it's been so long I can't remember. If it isn't a warm color, though, I know that. So bronze can be, black. It can be kind of bluish black, like I guess this is, or warm brown. But this is not warm. It's cool. There's the obvious rhythm of the legs, right? The ears, eyes, the teats, and of course the two human babies, Romulus and Remus, underneath her belly there. So there's powerful rhythms. It is stable almost entirely. She's standing at a right angle here. Her legs are pretty much, of course there's some diagonal line here. The two human babies, the upper part of their bodies are stable, no question, but their legs are dynamic. So it's more stable and dynamic. It's pretty obvious the largest mass is the wolf, and then they're equal, the two babies, human babies. And then for space, these are life-size figures. These are like the actual size. So it's a three-dimensional object with real space. I don't see any techniques here of overlapping or anything, because they are all individual objects that occupy real space. So life-size human babies and a life-size female wolf, or wolf mother, if you want to use that phrase. It's got really good cement texture, and I meant to say this as part of the meaning. The Etruscans were famous for being the best bronze sculptors, some say in the entire ancient world, but certainly in the Mediterranean. So just say there were many. Again, it's safe always to say this way. Many historians consider the Etruscans to be the greatest bronze sculptors of the ancient world. I would agree with that, having been to several museums throughout Italy where you can see Etruscan sculpture in bronze. They were masters of that medium. And that's all done with carved line. Of course, everybody knows that bronze sculpture starts out as clay, right? Carved clay. So it's carved line. No other kind of line. And then we have balance. Oh, I'd say so. You've got the intact body of a wolf, and her haunches are just about equal to her head and neck. And then the two human babies, even though one of them is kneeling further than the other one, crouched down further. They're the same size. They were twins, by the way. They're supposed to be twins. At least that's what I recall. Okay, and now we forget. Oh, modeling is just the lighting from the museum. And let's see, I think that's rhythm, of course. We already covered that. All right, let's move on to at least one of the main Roman slides. This is one that's really important. I won't be cutting it from the study list. Okay, this is Augustus of Prima Porta. Augustus is Augustus of Prima Porta. That's one word. Prima Porta, Primaporta, Rome, 20 BC or BCE. Okay, so this is a life-size sculpture of the first Roman emperor. Now, some people will debate that and say, wait a minute, that was Julius Caesar, not Augustus. But this is a sculpture, of the first Roman emperor to be recognized, accepted, however you want to say, just keep it simple, say the first Roman emperor. That's how he's always listed in every history book about ancient Rome, or chapters on ancient Rome and any other kind of history book. And it's true because his uncle, Julius Caesar, was assassinated before he could really, take power. Shortly after he tried to become the first emperor, Julius Caesar, that is the uncle of Augustus. So his uncle was assassinated when Augustus was a young man. And Augustus got revenge by leading soldiers in a civil war that lasted several years, and he won that civil war. So that's what made him the first Roman emperor. The title also gives you a clue about the meaning. Prima Porta means primary or main gate. Now, Stockstead, I've looked it up, and I know there's two interpretations. Where would this sculpture have been, displayed? Well, the two theories are, and I'll say there's no proof 100% for either one, but my friends in Italy, I know people who are historians, that professional historians and or museum docents in Rome itself or other parts of Italy, and they've said they believe it's the main gateway where Rome opened the gates to, let people in. It was on the north side of Rome. So just say the main gate, keep it simple, of Rome would probably be where this was positioned, above the main gate. The title gives you a clue that makes more sense than the second theory. So I'll say again, just say many historians, again, majority really, but just say many historians believe that this sculpture was placed above the main gate to the city of Rome, underneath which all people who wanted to enter the city would have to pass. Of course, that means they got to go look up as they're, where they're going to see whether they, right, if they look up at all, they'll see the first Roman emperor, a life-size sculpture, this piece of marble, of course it's marble, above their head as they walk or rode into the city of Rome underneath that gate. That makes the most sense to me. The other theory is that it was carved for a number of later Roman emperors and put on their estates. But the date, it's been dated, 20 BC is when Augustus was in power. Augustus, the other part of the meaning is, who was he? Well, besides being the first Roman emperor, he also won 2 civil wars. Now, we went through enough, or any country that's had a civil war, it's seems like most countries do at some point in their history. It's hard enough to recover from a single civil war. The Romans had 2 civil wars within a few years. What was the second one? I already told you the first one was him revenging the assassination of his uncle Julius, and he won that one. So then he became the first emperor of Rome. And then Marcus Aurelius, you may know him. Don't ask me to spell it. It's phonetic. Marcus Aurelius and Cleopatra joined forces and tried to overthrow the Roman Empire. Bad decision. They could have lived out their lives in their own province and just been local rulers. But when they did that, they caused a second civil war. And yes, Augustus won that one too. So he was a real hero to his people because they did not want to have to keep going through civil wars. And he managed to bring them. Here's the phrase. And when I have a whiteboard or blackboard, maybe on Wednesday, I'll be able to do this for you on the screen. There's a phrase, some of you know it, 2 words, Pax, P-A-X, which is Latin for peace, Romana, meaning the Roman peace. He founded that, Romana, of course, R-O-M-A-N-A. Pax Romana was his accomplishment. In other words, by winning 2 civil wars, he brought peace, stability, and prosperity to the Roman Empire. So, who is this figure as part of the meaning? Cupid. Remember, they had the same basic gods as the ancient Greeks. So Cupid, a symbol of love, is in the sculptures, part of it, I should just say, part of the sculpture. And the reason that the little Cupid figure is there is to show the love of the people of Rome for their first emperor. He was very popular. And he was, you know, more enlightened. You can call him whatever you want, an enlightened despot or something, but he was definitely not, you know, arrogant or insane the way a lot of Roman emperors later on were. So he was very competent ruler and very popular. He ruled the longest of any Roman emperor. And that's probably the 2 more facts, this one, and then one thing about what's on his armor. We'll take a close up in a minute. So the last 2 facts now about the meaning for this slide are that Augustus ruled the longest of any Roman emperor, 45 years. That was the life expectancy of poor people back then. 45 years he was in power. And then the last fact about the meaning is on this sculpture, he made sure, I might even have a close-up. Let me see if I do. Is it here? No, I don't. It's for, I think there's one later on we might see. Just say on his armor is, you know, a figure of his son, his adopted son, the second Roman emperor. And you probably should write his name, Tiberius. That's the river that runs through Rome is the Tiber. So Tiberius is T-I-B-E-R-I-U-S. Tiberius, he was the emperor that was in power when Jesus was crucified, by the way. So he's mentioned in a lot of context, but he was the second Roman emperor. And the reason is because he was designated as Augustus Caesar's successor. In his will, Augustus appointed his adopted son, Tiberius, as his successor, who therefore became the second Roman emperor. And this began a 200-year period, that is Augustus's rule, of peace and prosperity. That doesn't mean there was no fighting. There was wars on the borders and things, but there was no more civil wars or, you know, major crises in the Roman Empire, while this period they call the Pax Romana was, you know, under several more Roman emperors, but he started that. So he's a very important figure in the history of the world. Plus the month of August, if you didn't know that, you could add that, is named after him. All right, let's do a formal analysis and then I'll stick around for questions and we'll call it a day. It's 3 masses, I would call it. The base was added by the museum. I forget which means somewhere in Rome where it's on. So he's obviously the largest mass, and then it's a close call, but maybe the spear he's holding, which doesn't have a point on it, by the way, but it's obviously a spear. And then third could be the Cupid. Here it's life size, real space. A life size figure. He was 6 feet tall, which was taller by far than the average Roman male. So he was one. That's another reason he was very impressive in person, according to all the records. We actually even know, you know, a lot about his early childhood. There's, you know, all kinds of reasons. Here we don't have to worry about historical records being missing because, of course, the Romans kept records on everything they did, and many of those survived. So we know he was about 6 feet tall. So it's a life-size 6 foot tall figure of an adult human. And of course, then that means there is only one technique for space, and that's overlapping. The armor and his robes overlap his body. And I guess you could say that little, right, Cupid down here overlaps the tree stump and his hand overlaps the spear. Oh, I think I finished it. Maybe I didn't. The mass, sorry, would of course be him is the largest. Then I'd say the spear. Yeah, I did. Right, and then Cupid. It's mostly stable, and he's standing in contrapposto. you don't have to add that because that comes up more with the earlier Greek sculptures we saw last week, but it is that same pose that the Greeks invented. The weight is on this leg, and this leg is mostly, at least from the knee. And actually, I've seen the piece, so this is a few inches behind this knee. So the back leg is loose, and of course, one arm is raised and the other is down, usually holding something. Of course, he's holding a spear, and his spine forms a gentle S curve. So once again, that fits. You could mention that if you choose to, as part of the meaning. If this is on the, and it has a high probability of being on the midterm, if it's on the essay part of the midterm. All right, balance, yes, it's an attacked human figure. Balance from left to right and top to bottom. Similar texture, superb, as it would be in an earlier Greek sculpture. After all, probably it was carved by a Greek slave. That's what most of the artists were in Rome, was Greek slaves. Talented, trained in Greece maybe, and then brought to Italy to work for the emperor or some other, wealthy or powerful patron. So we have the similar texture is on the armor, on the robes, on his hair, on his face and hands. That's all done, of course, with carved line. Now, this is actually a warm color, having seen the piece. It's kind of a yellow marble, and that's not actually discoloration. But the breastplate looks cool to me. So you could say it that way, that the armor is cool, but most of his body, legs, arms certainly, and the robes are a light yellow, and therefore warm color. There is modeling here, but of course it's the lighting from the museum itself that creates the modeling. So there is no technique for modeling. And I think I said it's mostly stable, except for actually we didn't quite do that. Yeah, there's a slight curve to the spine. So it's even hard to see because of all the clothing he's wearing, but he's mostly standing upright, and his head, of course, and neck are upright. One of his legs is, but obviously the loose leg is dynamic and the raised arm is dynamic, and the top of his head. So it's a little bit of both. All right, we've got a pretty well good way, considering we lost 5 or 10, more like 10 minutes with that glitch, that Zoom curve, what do you want to call it, through, and I had to restart. So thank you guys for your patience and your persistence. And anyone who's missing this, I assume they're going to watch this on YouTube as of no later than 8 p.m. on Friday. It'll be posted. Okay, so questions. This is now your chance to ask any questions about anything we've covered today. And don't forget, if you just joined us late, you can send your paper in, if you didn't already, by midnight tonight. If you do, it'll only be 5 points off instead of 10 after midnight. Then it's 10 points off, as there's still a few more people that haven't turned their papers in. So anybody have any questions about anything extra credit? Haven't gotten many people yet doing extra credit. So, keep in mind, you can earn up to 60 points. That's more than one letter grade worth of extra points. And you still have plenty of time, of course. All right. Any questions about anything we covered today or anything else having to do with grading? Anybody? Just to make sure we don't overlook anything, because since we had a delayed start, I think we made up for that, though. We're about where we should be, so we're not behind. And in fact, I'm going to show you my own slides of Rome, and those you could just look at and listen, don't have to take notes. I think we'll get to those probably next week. No, let's do them on Wednesday, because we want to do the review for the midterm next week. Yeah, so you'll see probably, toward the end of my lecture on. We won't finish all the Roman slides. You can see there's more than there usually are, because there's so much to say. It's 2 weeks topic on ancient Rome, but I don't want to rush right through the review process for the midterm. It's too important. So probably just we'll do about probably all that's remaining of this list, the rest of week 7's, and my own slides of Rome on Wednesday. I think you'll find those interesting. From several trips, just glean the best slides from each of those trips to show you for your own interest. All right, anybody else have any questions? Anyone about anything we've covered? All right, thank you guys again for your patience and persistence. All right, see you guys on Wednesday. Let's hope we don't have another glitch. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you guys for your.
Bye, thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
take care. Have a good couple of days. All right.